How do parks become national parks? And can they stop being a national park? That's what we're going to talk about today. Hi, this is Jill from the North Woods talking about how to explore nature right outside your front door. Even here in the North Woods area, we have national parks, national shorelines, all sorts of things. And we're going to talk today about how something becomes a national park and what kind of transition do they go to, and then can they ever stop being one? So we'll dig into that a little bit. The first national park started with Yellowstone in 1872, and it was the very first national park. At that time, this was considered to be a radical idea, setting aside land not for kings, not for companies, not for settlers, but for everyone, forever. That this would be land that would be set aside. Congress passed the Yellowstone Act, and then that was Ulysses S. Grant signed it. That's how it all began. Congress must write a law, pass it, and then the national park is approved with the president's approval. That really hasn't changed over 150 years. The path to becoming a park is essentially the same thing. So right now it goes through what is considered to be a resource study by the National Park Service. And then they indicate, is this a place of national significance? Is it suitable to be in the park system? Is it possible for us or a group like us to manage this? And then if the answer comes back yes, then they get Congress involved. And that's where we have to look at the cost, the politics of it, the public support for this particular matter. The Everglades in Florida were kind of a good example of this. It was considered to be a swamp at some point. Not worth saving. There's no value here. And now we know there's a lot of value in a swamp and a marsh. We've talked about that a couple episodes ago. But it was a unique and very fragile ecosystem. It had species that were nowhere else in the world and in the United States. And so in 1947, it officially became a park. But usually it's not always that dramatic, like a mountain or, something that you think of in our national park. Sometimes that subtle beauty of a wetland, which I love wetlands, going to one tomorrow, I enjoy very much. And so I've been to the Everglades National Park. Where I was, there was no bathrooms. Just be aware of that. And then there's other kinds of park, too. In 1970, Congress created something called the 1916 Organic Act, where they created a national park service to say that all the units, regardless of whether they're considered to be of equal value to our national heritage, that kind of thing, may be managed differently. So we have a national park like Yellowstone, but maybe we're going to have separate rules. Yellowstone, you can't go hunting in. While national preserves and recreation areas, you might be able to. So they can have different rules based on the landscape and based on how it has to be protected. There are 400 units in the national park system. 63 are true national parks. And there are some even national monuments, lake shores, battlefields, historic sites. I go camping on a national lake shore. That is relevant to the podcast I did last week about the Great Lakes. I go to the Apostle Islands National Lakeshore. And it's a very unique environment and has to be cared for because it can be easily damaged by that. Presidents can create what is called a national monument from the 1906 Antiquities Act. Congress is not involved in that. They make these national monuments essentially faster. And sometimes they're a little bit more controversial, or they don't have the backing of Congress, maybe because it would cost a lot of money. Or I have seen times where there have been ranges where farmers and herds graze on that land. If we turn it into a national park, the farmers will lose access to this land without anything. It's not really their land, but they were allowed as part of land management to graze on it. And now if it's made into a national park or a monument, they're going to lose access to graze their herds on it. And so now it might not have the support that other picks have happened. Like the Grand Canyon started as a national monument declared by Theodore Roosevelt in 1908. Later, Congress upgraded it to a national park. So sometimes being a monument can be a stepping stone to becoming a national park. And like I said, it usually happens, where I've seen it happen, is where there is not very much support for it becoming a national park at that moment. And then it leads to the question of, can a park stop being a national park? And that's a really interesting question, because most people sort of look at it that way. We grow in national parks. We don't go down in numbers in national parks. But the most famous example is the one close to my heart, Mackinac National Park in Michigan. It was created in 1875 and was the second U.S. national park after Yellowstone. But 20 years later, in 1895, it was transformed over to the state of Michigan and now is a state park. Congress decided that the Army no longer needed the fort. There was Fort Mackinac. Soldiers were stationed on it. Remember, we did the Great Lakes, and these points along the Great Lakes are a huge transportation system. If we are in the midst of battle, lose one of those transportation points. So we had a fort there. But that fort was decommissioned, and then Mackinac Island took it as a state park. It lost its national park status, and they think it had a lot to do with, first of all, budget cuts, and second, military priorities. Like I said, the fort dried up, therefore the park dried up as well. The Army was maintaining that fort, stationing soldiers there, and by 1894, the War Department found it very expensive, and then they stopped seeing any real reason to staff that fort any longer. So when, like I said, the Army decommissioned it, they left, and so did the national parks. You think about it, that when these types of things happen, you're going to think, oh no, is it going to go into like condos and cabins? Is it going to go to local residents? And so politicians lobbied to preserve the area for public use at least, and Senator James McMillan worked with both the state and the federal lawmakers to successfully transfer the land to the state of Michigan, ensuring that it would be a state park and still stay protected. And now, like I said, it is formally named the Mackinac Island State Park Commission to take care of it. Mackinac transitioned from a national park to a state park in 1895, and the stipulation in 1895 for the transfer of the state park from the federal government is that the land must remain a public park or revert back to federal ownership. So for that reason, the change happened, and it didn't do any sort of damage or change the nature of the park or the historic value of it. So yes, a park can be decommissioned or de-designated. It doesn't happen that often, but it certainly can. And you can see that a local group would certainly like to keep their designation. A lot of federal funding comes in with that, management from the National Park Service. And so you could see that some people might not enjoy having their crown jewel in their state revert back from a national park, but it can happen for sure. And so other national parks, like I said, I mentioned Yellowstone. There's Yosemite. I was just there a couple of years ago. The National Park Service has a budget, and they maintain the area. They are very good. I've gone to Rocky Mountain National Park probably more than any other park in the United States, or national park in the United States, and they talk about how they keep the bugs from infiltrating the trees. They're very much into maintaining that area, keeping it from catching on fire, keeping it open so that people can visit it and see things without damaging the terrain very much. And it's hard. It's hard because people will drive in certain areas and maybe damage something that's up there. I like to go up Fall River Road in Rocky Mountain National Park. It is a dirt road. It goes straight up to the Alpine Visitor Center. And you can take the more paved Trail Ridge Road, but the Fall Ridge Road is my favorite. But it has a lot of places that are very sensitive. So how can we keep those places protected at the same time, giving people like me the opportunity to go look at it? National monuments, preserves, historic sites, recreation areas, lake shores will receive less money per acre, but they also probably have less visitors, and there's not as much to pay attention to from me going camping on the National Lake Shore compared to all the people that go to Rocky Mountain National Park. So you have to balance, staff and money, funds and resources in a way to protect and preserve it while giving, like I said, people like us opportunities to go see it. Congress, of course, appropriates money for the National Park Services, for maintaining the lands. There are entrance fees. They make money off of concessions and sales. My favorite, again, is the Alpine Visitor Center at the very top of Trail Ridge Road. I buy their stuff all the time, and I just love going up there. So they make money that way too. Donations, foundations, friends of, the friends of this national park groups will help raise millions of dollars in private donations for restoration, education. There's many education centers there, and whatever research they're doing in their landscapes that they have. Parks with higher visibility, think about Yellowstone, Yosemite, Everglades, Grand Canyon, they attract, more champions, when it comes to private fundraising and congressional fundraising. While sometimes the smaller sites, the historic homes, the lakeshore, the lake shores, the nationalized lake shores, the battlefields sometimes have very limited budgets. And so the parks will only have a handful of staff to maintain that area. And when a site does get upgraded from a monument to a national park, the funding has to increase because it has now become more of the infrastructure. It's going to have more staff. It's going to have visitor centers in historic areas. If you think about Indiana's dunes, they were redesignated from a national lakeshore, like my beloved Lake Superior, to a national park in 2019. And visitation spiked. The funding requests went up to handle how many visitors are coming. I had to tell you that I think is now the biggest challenge is these national parks have become so popular. Now Rocky Mountain National Park, I think the Bryce Canyon, Zion Canyon in Utah, now are having lotteries like when do you show up? When can you go there? Luckily, I went to Yosemite on a weekday. It wasn't terribly busy. I got to see everything with my coworkers we wanted to see. But, during the weekend times, you can have wall-to-wall traffic. And they're trying to figure out what can we do so that everybody gets a chance to see it while at the same time, you're not having traffic jams that last hours long. And the question comes too, could ever a state deny the federal government from making a local park a national park? Maybe oppose it becoming a national monument? Like I said, there are places where people were able to feed their herds for free and graze on that land, and suddenly if it became a national park, they would lose it. So sometimes lawmakers don't want to get into that political storm. Local land or local owners control some of the land, and so then they want to keep it. Tribal lands, private property, and so sometimes that land is donated or sold to the federal government, but sometimes people want to keep it, and they want to keep using it for whatever they were using it for. They can't simply just take it. And so that's where state legislatures and governors can lobby for or against the designation, believing that it's going to hurt an industry like mining or logging, ranching, oil extraction, that kind of thing, and they don't want the federal oversight. On the other side, with the national monuments, presidents can unilaterally declare that, and so they don't have to ask the states at all. States have often pushed back. The Grand Staircase Escalante National Monument in Utah was declared by President Clinton in 1996, and the Utah politicians did not want it converted over because it had coal-rich land. In Bears Ear, also in Utah, there was tribal advocacy on both sides, and so then people fought back and forth for and against it. So yes, people can fight back and states can fight back. It just matters on which thing is going to get declared and how much, power that particular state has. So the Everglades, like I mentioned before, the Florida leaders reluctantly handed over the swampy land because they just sort of debated whether it was worth having this area. And after years debate, it did become that. Like I said, there was local industry in the Indiana dunes saying that we have industry here. Putting it as a national park will destroy our industry. And they didn't make it a national park then. They made it a lake shore, just like where I camp. Alaska had several places where they had conservation acts that created 10 new national parks, but it was heavily controversial because of hunting, land use, and tribal interests. So there can be debates. A lot of times states want to have their areas considered national parks. It's going to bring in a lot of tourism. It's going to bring a lot of interest to their state. They can't fight Congress directly. They can't veto Congress. So if Congress voted for it and the president signed it, they couldn't do much about it. But, governors and state legislatures have a say and have some pull with Congress usually. They don't want to create this kind of bad press and ongoing resistance. So I hope that helps you understand this idea a little bit more. I think it's kind of interesting because I love national parks. I love going to them. I've been to not all of the national parks, but I would say probably a good 2/3 of them. And I just love that idea of land just being set aside so we can appreciate it. Of course, it has to balance all our interests, all the occupations and the different things we do with land, the people who live there right now. And it also has to balance how many of us visit it. I don't like the Rocky Mountain National Park lottery very much. And some people I know have told me they've never been to Rocky Mountain National Park despite living right next to it because they didn't want to read the website to figure out how to get a lottery ticket for it. It's not terribly hard. Don't be afraid about it. And there are a lot of great podcasts and resources out there to tell you exactly how to do this. There's this fantastic couple that do the Dirt in My Shoes podcast, website, resources for every national park out there. She used to work as a national park ranger, and she is just a true delight. So if you're interested in visiting parks and you don't know where to begin, my suggestion is go to her website. I'll check to see if she has a YouTube channel as well, and check it out because I think that she will give you the best information of where to stay, what to do, and how to work through whatever system that they have. And until next time, I hope you have a happy journey. And my challenge to you is identify one national park you could go visit sometime soon. All right, everyone, thanks so much. I appreciate you watching, listening. You can email me at jill@startwithsmallsteps.com. You can comment on the channel right here and tell me which national parks are your favorites. Which ones do you hope to visit soon? I appreciate you being there. Have a great day.